Welcome to Libeth. The characters in Tales of Old Japan are not characters in the sense that a Victorian novel would use the term. They do not develop. They do not surprise themselves. They do not arrive at unexpected self-knowledge through the pressure of events. They are, with very few exceptions, demonstrations, human figures whose function is to make visible, through action and sacrifice, the ethical logic of the world they inhabit. This is not a failure of the Japanese narrative tradition, and it is not a limitation that Mitford has imposed by translating poorly. It is a structural feature of a mode of storytelling in which the individual exists primarily as the bearer of obligations, and in which the interest of the story lies not in who a person is becoming, but in how completely and at what cost they fulfill what they already owe. To read these characters as if they were the interiority-possessing, self-constructing individuals of European realism is to read them incorrectly. They need to be read as types, but types in the strong philosophical sense, not the weak psychological one. They are types that carry an entire civilization's worth of ethical content, and the ethical content they carry is dense enough that unpacking it becomes the work of the book. The leader of the rōnin is the figure around whom this logic is most fully displayed, and his centrality to the book's argument is earned by the specific form his sacrifice takes. Most accounts of extraordinary loyalty involve a man who suffers external hardship, persecution, poverty, danger, in service of a cause. What makes the rōnin leader's case structurally different is that his sacrifice is internal. He does not simply endure difficult circumstances. He dismantles himself. He performs the complete abandonment of everything that constituted his identity as a samurai, his sobriety, his dignity, his reputation for moral seriousness, his family relationships. Because the mission demands invisibility, and invisibility requires the destruction of the visible self. He divorces his wife not because he has stopped loving her, but because she could be used against him, and he cannot afford to have anything that could be used against him. He drinks publicly and visits brothels not because he has abandoned his discipline, but because discipline, in this moment, requires the performance of its opposite. The gap between the appearance and the reality is total, and maintaining that gap, year after year, in the face of social contempt and personal loss, is the most demanding thing the story requires of him. What this means, taken seriously, is that the rōnin leader is not a hero in the conventional sense. He is a mechanism. He has made himself into a tool of obligation. He has so completely identified with what he owes that there is no self remaining to protect apart from the mission. The Japanese ethical tradition has a concept for this kind of total subordination of personal interest to relational obligation. The sense that what you are is constituted by what you owe, not by any prior or independent self that exists before or outside those obligations. The rōnin leader is the worked example of this concept taken to its furthest consequence. And what Mitford's presentation of this figure does for the Victorian reader is both clarify and disturb. Clarify, because the loyalty is recognizable as a form of virtue. Disturb, because the logic that produces it would require the dissolution of the very concept of the autonomous individual that Victorian liberalism took as its foundational assumption. A world in which the self is legitimately expendable in service of obligation is not a world that Victorian England could fully endorse, even while it found it romantically compelling. The provocateur who initiates the chain of events by insulting and manipulating the Lord into violence is the necessary structural complement to the rōnin leader. He is not developed as a character with interior complexity. His function is to embody the failure of the honor system, the condition in which power is held by someone who does not feel bound by the obligations that power is supposed to entail. He is corrupt, cowardly, and when the rōnin finally come for him, he behaves with the precise combination of incompetence and desperation that confirms the tale's moral arithmetic. His resistance is undignified. His death is undignified. He does not know how to die because he never knew how to live. He never accepted the obligations that would have given his life its form. The contrast with the rōnin is total and deliberate. They die with ceremony and precision, as samurai, in the ritual form that affirms everything they were. He dies badly, as someone who accumulated position without accepting the moral structure that position was supposed to express. The tale is not simply about the triumph of loyalty over betrayal. It is about the difference between holding power and deserving it, and about the cost, measured in years and sacrifice, of enforcing that difference when the institutional structures have failed to do so. Lord Asano, the catalyst whose death sets everything in motion, is barely a character at all in the conventional sense. He appears, he is insulted, he strikes back, he is condemned, he dies. He is almost entirely a function, the legitimizing loss around which the rest of the story organizes itself. And yet his thinness as a character is itself meaningful. He does not need to be fully realized because his role in the ethical structure is not to be a person, but to be an obligation. His death is the obligation, externalized, made permanent. The retainers who spend years avenging him are not avenging him as a particular individual with particular qualities they loved. They are honoring the structure of which he was the head, the household, the obligation, the continuity that his death threatened to break. This is why the tale is not finally about grief. It is about debt. The dead lord is owed something, and what he is owed is the completion of the moral structure his death interrupted. The rōnin give him that completion. The grave where they present his enemy's head is not the end of the story, but its resolution, the point at which the moral debt is discharged and the household's integrity is restored, even though the household itself no longer formally exists. The shogun's officials who deliberate over the fate of the rōnin represent something that Mitford's text treats with genuine intellectual respect. Institutional authority trying honestly to apply its own logic to a case that reveals the limits of that logic. These are not villains. They are the system thinking about itself and thinking carefully. The question they face, whether men who have broken the law in service of the law's own highest values should be punished, has no clean answer within the framework of any legal system, because legal systems are built on the premise that they, and not private actors, are the legitimate enforcers of social obligation. If the shogun's officials acknowledge that the rōnin were right, they acknowledge that individuals may legitimately take the enforcement of social obligation into their own hands when the system fails, which is a principle that no legal system can acknowledge without undermining itself. So they enforce the law. They order the rōnin to die. But they give them the form of death that affirms rather than negates what they were. This is not a compromise. It is the system performing its own tragedy, understanding exactly what it is destroying and destroying it anyway because it cannot do otherwise. Mitford presents this without editorial comment, and the absence of comment is itself the most powerful editorial choice he could have made. He trusts the reader to feel the weight of the institutional dilemma without being told how to feel about it. The supernatural figures in the shorter tales operate according to a different logic from the human characters, but they serve a related function in the book's overall argument. The Tengu, the mountain spirits who appear to particularly worthy or particularly desperate students of martial arts, and offer them teaching that no human master could provide, establish that the extraordinary capacities of the warrior class are understood within the tradition as having sources beyond human effort and human transmission. The martial arts are not merely techniques. They are connected, through the figure of the Tengu, to forces that move through the natural world and that express themselves through individuals who are in some sense prepared to receive them. This cosmological dimension does not contradict the ethical logic of the human tales. It deepens it by showing that obligation and excellence are not purely social constructions, but expressions of something that the universe itself is organized to reward. The Goblin Cat stories introduce a different kind of figure, the shapeshifter, the thing that looks like what you know and trust, but is something else entirely. The cat that transforms, that conceals its true nature within a familiar form, that kills under the appearance of innocence. This figure carries a set of anxieties about the reliability of appearances that connects directly to the political world the book is set in. In a civilization where, as the rōnin tale demonstrates, the most disciplined actors are those who have most completely concealed their real intentions, the capacity of things to be other than they appear is not merely a supernatural curiosity. It is a structural feature of the social world. The warrior who has learned to disguise himself completely, the retainer who drinks and debauches as a cover for absolute loyalty, the official who uses ceremony to conceal corruption. These are all, in different registers, versions of the shapeshifter. The supernatural tales give this theme a cosmological extension, suggesting that the instability of appearances is not just a political problem, but a feature of reality itself, that the world is full of things that present one face and contain another. The ghost stories complete this picture by establishing that the dead are not simply absent. They are present in a particular way. They have claims. They make demands. They cannot be simply ignored or placated. The ghost who returns is almost always a ghost who has unfinished business, who died before an obligation was discharged, who cannot rest until the living have completed what death interrupted. This is exactly the logic of the vendetta taken into the supernatural register. The dead have a right to the completion of what they were owed, and the living are the instruments through which that completion is achieved. What looks like two separate domains, the legal institution of vendetta on the one hand, the supernatural practice of ghost haunting on the other, is actually a single moral logic operating at different levels of the world. The dead demand their due. The question is always who will give it to them, and at what cost. Mitford himself, as the narrator who frames all of this material for the British reader, is the final character who needs to be considered, and in some ways the most complex, because he is a character who does not fully acknowledge his own position. He is warm, intellectually engaged, clearly admiring of the samurai ethic and the civilization that produced it. He brings genuine knowledge and genuine curiosity to everything he describes. He is also a diplomat of a colonial power living inside a treaty arrangement that systematically disadvantaged the country he was documenting, which means that his position of observation was also a position of structural advantage, and that advantage is never directly examined in the text. His admiration for Japan is real, but it is the admiration of someone who is not required to live inside the consequences of the system he admires. someone who can appreciate the aesthetic and ethical dimensions of samurai culture from a position that the samurai themselves, in their declining economic circumstances and their increasingly precarious political situation, could not afford. This does not invalidate his observations. It frames them. And understanding the frame is as important as understanding the content it surrounds. That's all for today on Libeth. One new book every week. At least we try.